Arizona Territory, 1884. The heat shimmered off the tracks at the dusty Winslow station, the whistle of the westbound train still echoing into the dry hills when Nolan Lark stepped off the platform. Both twins clutched in the crooks of his arms. "Daddy, my shoe's full of rocks," his daughter Tessa whined, squirming against his side. "That is because you kicked half the desert gettin' here," Nolan replied, setting her down gently, brushing the dust from her hem. His son, Tucker, leaned his cheek against Nolan's shoulder, already dozing. Nolan looked up, scanning the platform for the supply man who never showed when he said he would. But it was not the absence of crates that caught Nolan's eye. It was the woman. She sat alone at the far end of the bench, her back straight, gloved hands folded in her lap. Her white dress was fine but wrinkled, the lace at her collar wilted, and her eyes, large and fixed on nothing, were red at the rims. A small trunk sat by her feet, untouched. She looked like someone who had been waiting too long for something that was not coming. Nolan shifted Tucker to his other arm and stepped toward her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but sure. "You all right?" She blinked, slow and tired, then looked up at him. "I was supposed to be married this morning," she said. "He never came." The words hit the air like a dropped plate. Behind Nolan, Tessa chased a beetle across the boards. "I see," Nolan said. "You got anyone in town?" "No," her voice cracked. "No one knows I am here. My name is Temperance Zeller." Nolan held out a hand. "Nolan Lark, that one's Tessa." "This here is Tucker." She looked at the children, her face softening. "They are yours, they are," he paused. "Their mother passed 2 winters ago." Temperance nodded, her chin trembling, but she did not cry again. Nolan stood quiet, not moving, not pressing, just there. "I do not know what to do," she whispered. "You will not figure it out sittin' on a bench in the sun," he said. "Come on, I will take you home." Her brows lifted. "You do not even know me." "I know you got no one waitin'," he said. "And I got a ranch with too much space and 2 kids who could use a woman's kindness. I'm not leaving you here." She hesitated, he could see it in her fingers, the way they clutched each other, but then she stood, brushing her skirts, and lifted her chin. "I will come." Nolan tipped his hat, then gently picked up her trunk. "Wagons out back." The ride to the Lark Ranch took over an hour. Tessa sang off-key, Tucker napped against Temperance's shoulder, and Nolan drove the team steady as the dust rolled behind them. Temperance watched the land unfold, mesquite, dry riverbeds, the far-off shimmer of mountains, and she did not speak much. But she held Tucker with care, and when he stirred and reached for her hand, she gave it without hesitation. When they reached the homestead, a small house with a porch worn smooth by years of boots, Temperance stepped down from the wagon and looked around. "It is peaceful," she said. "That it is," Nolan agreed. "You hungry?" She nodded. He handed her Tucker, lifted Tessa to the ground, then carried the trunk inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and bread. Simple, clean, quiet, Nolan made supper: beans, cornbread, eggs, and Temperance helped set the table. They ate with the children, and afterward she washed dishes while Nolan bathed the twins in the copper tub near the fire. Later, with the children tucked into their bedroom and the stars climbing overhead, Nolan poured 2 cups of coffee and stepped out onto the porch where she sat wrapped in her shawl. He handed her a cup. "I do not expect anything from you," he said. "I brought you here because I could not leave you there. I know," her voice was soft, "but I do not want to be a burden. You are not." She looked out over the dark land, then turned to face him. "I was not just deserted, Nolan, I was humiliated. My family is back in Missouri, and I left everything behind to marry a man who never even stepped off the train." Nolan watched her in the dim light, her face pale and still. "I cannot go back," she said, "and I do not know how to be alone." "You are not alone," he said. She blinked, startled. "You are here," he said, "and that means something." She looked at him, really looked, and he saw the shift in her eyes, like she was seeing him for the first time not as a rescuer but as a man. Then she said very carefully, "What would people say me living here, unmarried?" He met her eyes. "They might talk, but if you want, I can make it right." Temperance did not flinch. "You mean marry me?" I mean give you a name and a place, a family, and if it turns into more than that, we will let it." She stood slowly, walked to the edge of the porch and looked out over the land. "All right," she said, "I will be your wife," and Nolan, steady and quiet, stepped beside her. "We will go to the justice in the morning," he said. Temperance turned to him, and for the first time since he met her, there was a spark of something light behind her eyes. Hope. She reached for his hand. He took it, and the night stretched out wide and still around them. The next morning dawned with a pale sky and a faint breeze that cooled the dust before the sun had its say. Nolan saddled the buckskin mare, her hooves clipping softly on the packed earth as he led her to the wagon. Temperance stood on the porch with her hair pinned tight and a navy shawl over her shoulders, her hands clasped, not shaking but still. "Tessa's still sleepin'," she said, stepping down. "Tucker's dressing." Nolan nodded once. He lifted the bench seat to check the marriage paper he'd tucked there weeks ago, long before he'd met her. A rancher's life rarely left time for courtship, but he'd once thought maybe when the land was more forgiving, he'd try again. Now the paper had purpose. By the time they rode into Hallbrook, the sun was high enough to burn off the morning's mercy. The justice's office stood between the feed supply and the saddler's shop. Nolan helped Temperance down, his hand steady at her waist just long enough to feel the breath she held. "Ready?" he asked. She gave a single nod. Inside, the room smelled of dust and old paper. The justice, a stooped man with a ridged brow, looked up from his ledger but didn't question the pairing. He simply gestured to the two chairs before his desk. Temperance sat with her back straight, her voice even when asked her name. Nolan gave his clearly. The man read the vows with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times, then slid the paper across and handed them a fountain pen. Temperance signed first. Her hand trembled only once. Nolan followed, the scratch of the nib loud in the stillness. When it was done, they stood. He didn't kiss her. She didn't offer her cheek, but there was a quietness between them, like a thread drawn tight and sure. Outside, Nolan tied the horse to the post, then turned to her. "We'll stop by the mercantile," she glanced at him. "For what?" "Whatever you need." They walked the narrow boardwalk together. She didn't linger over ribbons or bonnets, but she paused beside a display of tin spoons and sewing thread. Nolan noted the way her eyes moved not with want but calculation. "I'll need muslin," she said. "And lye if I'm to make soap." He tipped his head toward the clerk. "Tell him what you want." She did, her voice plain but firm, and Nolan stood back, watching her build a list of small, necessary things. She didn't ask for anything not useful. When she finished, he paid without comment and they packed the goods into the back of the wagon. On the road home, Temperance spoke, not looking at him. "You've done a great deal for me." "You've done some for me too," he replied. "Tucker didn't wake cryin' last night." "First time in near a week." She looked down at her hands. "I noticed," she said. They rode on in silence until the house appeared, its roofline cutting the horizon. As the wagon rolled to a stop, Tessa pushed open the front door, barefoot and blinking against the sun. "Where'd you go?" she asked, running to the steps. Nolan lifted her into the wagon bed. "We had to see a man in town." Temperance reached back to hand her the sack of thread. "This is for you, Tessa. You can help me mend your dress." Tessa grinned, hugging the bundle. Inside, the air held the warmth of the fire Temperance had banked before they left. She unwrapped the soap lye and set it near the basin, her motions already folded into the rhythm of the house. Later that evening, Temperance stood near the hearth, combing out Tessa's damp hair while Nolan dried Tucker's feet with a cloth. The children spoke in half whispers, lulled by the quiet of the room. Temperance looked up. "I'd like to move the cot into the children's room." Nolan set the towel down. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "They sleep better when they're not alone, and I can tend them if they wake," he nodded. "I'll carry it after supper." That night after the children slept, Nolan stepped onto the porch. He didn't expect her to follow, but she did. She leaned against the post, arms folded against the cooling air. "I don't know what makes a marriage good, but I want to try." He looked out at the horizon where the stars were just beginning to scatter. Trying's more than most do, he said. She turned to him, her face unreadable in the shadows. I don't want to be just another mouth to feed. You're not, he said. You're part of this. She stepped down onto the dirt, walked a few paces into the yard, and stood with her face tilted to the sky. I almost believed I'd be forgotten, she said. Left behind like a suitcase someone meant to come back for. Nolan stepped toward her, stopped just within reach. You're here now, he said. No one's leaving you. She didn't answer, but she took a slow breath and he saw the set of her shoulders ease. Then, without ceremony, she turned and walked back inside. Nolan stayed a while longer, listening to the wind move through the dry grass, the soft creak of the house settling behind him, and the faintest sound of someone humming low from the children's room. It wasn't love yet, but it was something growing. The wind shifted in the third week, coming down from the north with a cool edge that whispered of fall. The mesquite leaves turned brittle, and the chickens paced more restlessly in their pen. Work on the ranch grew heavier with the shortening days, fencing to mend before winter, hay to stack, cattle to check on the higher ridges. Temperance had taken to the rhythm without complaint. She rose before daylight, ironed Nolan's shirts with water boiled on the stove, stitched the children's socks by lamplight when they were asleep. But her hands, though steady, bore the red marks of learning. Blisters on the fingers of her right hand told Nolan she hadn't used a drawknife before, yet she'd helped him strip bark from fence posts anyway. Your stitching's tighter than mine, Nolan said one evening, watching her patch Tucker's trousers. She didn't look up. My mother taught me before I could read, said a woman should always know how to repair what matters. He leaned back in the chair, the firelight warming the toe of his boot. Did she teach you how to ride? No, she said after a pause. That was my brother. He'd sneak me out to the pasture after chores. We'd ride bareback until our legs ached. He smiled, not with amusement, but the kind of quiet ease that came from knowing something new about her. You miss him? Temperance set the needle down. He died in the war. Shiloh? Her voice softened, but she didn't look away. I was 11, he was 17. Nolan nodded once. He didn't offer sympathy, she hadn't asked for it. Outside, a coyote called once, then fell silent. The children were already asleep, their small breaths drifting from the open door of their room. I've been meaning to ask, Nolan said. Would you want to name the milk cow? Tessa's been asking, and I told her it ought to be your place. Temperance blinked, surprised. I didn't know I'd earned that much say. You're living here. She's your cow, same as mine. She tilted her head, then smiled small but real. Then her name's Dinah, that sound right to you? Sounds just fine. They sat like that a while longer, the fire snapping low. When Temperance finally stood and stretched, she touched her back with one hand, wincing. You all right? Nolan asked, rising. Just sore. I've never lifted so many buckets in my life. Without thinking, Nolan reached for her wrist, gently guiding her hand away. He placed his palm between her shoulders, slow and careful, pressing in a circle. She didn't pull away. You carry more than water, he said. Temperance breathed in, her eyes closing for a moment. So do you. The space between them stilled. Then she stepped back, her voice quiet again. Good night, Nolan. Night, Temperance. She walked toward the back room where her cot still stood beside the children's beds. Nolan stayed by the fire, staring into the low coals until the silence folded around him like cloth. The next morning, he found her outside with Tessa, both of them bent over the garden bed that hadn't borne much since the summer heat took it. Temperance had a tin in her hand, scattering seeds in smooth arcs. Didn't think anything would take this late in the year, Nolan said, stepping up beside them. They're late peas, she replied. They might not bloom, but I'd rather try than let the dirt go empty. Tessa looked up. Mama says green things come back if you give him a little rain and a lot of waitin'. Nolan met Temperance's eyes across the patch of soil. She didn't correct the girl. That evening brought rain in a slow, steady hush that softened the roof and turned the yard to mud. Nolan stood on the porch while Temperance dried the children's hair by the hearth. When she joined him, she carried 2 mugs, both filled half with warmed cider. "I found the jug in the cabinet," she said. "Didn't think you'd mind, not one bit." They drank in silence, the rain steady. Then she spoke low. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" He glanced toward the barn, the hills beyond. "Sometimes, but this land's the last thing I've got from my father. I couldn't sell it." "I'm not asking you to," she said quickly. "I meant," she hesitated, "if things had been different, if you hadn't come to the station that day." He took a slow breath. "Then I wouldn't have met you, and the house would still be too quiet." Her eyes searched his face, something uncertain behind them. "You're not just saying that to be kind." "No," he said. "I don't say much I don't mean." Temperance looked down, one hand tightening on the mug. "I keep thinking one day you'll wake up and realize I've brought you too much trouble." "You haven't," he said. "And I don't take to changing my mind overnight." A long pause passed between them. Then, softly, she said, "I like who I am here." Nolan didn't answer. He just reached for the mug from her hand and set both on the porch rail, then turned to her fully. He didn't rush. He just watched her. Temperance didn't step away when he took her hand. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the rain kept falling. But in that narrow space beneath the porch eaves, Nolan leaned down and Temperance rose just enough to meet him. The kiss was quiet, no promises, no words, but it lingered. And when they stepped apart, they didn't let go of each other's hands. The days shortened, the mornings cooler now, the light slanting different through the cottonwoods behind the house. Nolan rose early to check the herd along the southern ridge, leaving before the frost had cleared from the troughs. He left a quiet word for Temperance, and a kiss pressed to the crown of her head while she stirred oatmeal over the stove. The house had settled into a rhythm that neither of them spoke aloud. She no longer asked what to do with the laundry or where the soap rags were kept. He didn't explain why he fixed the back latch before dawn or how many posts were still leaning in the south pasture. What needed doing got done, and what was shared didn't need saying. That afternoon, Temperance carried the mending to the porch, Tucker following close, dragging a broken wheelbarrow behind him. "I think it's too far gone," she said, eyeing the cracked axle. "I'm not gonna ride it," Tucker said. "It's for Dinah's feed." Temperance folded her needlework into her lap. "Then you'll need to fix it like it's meant to carry something heavier than air." He nodded, earnest, and disappeared around the barn. Nolan returned as the sun dipped behind the ridge, his coat dusted white at the shoulder from the salt flats near the wash. He washed up by the pump and stepped inside while Temperance scraped cornmeal into a pot of boiling water. "I saw fresh deer tracks," he said, reaching for the towel. "Might mean a buck's come down early." She stirred the mush slowly. "You planning to hunt tomorrow before the frost lifts?" She looked over her shoulder. "Bring back the hide if you do." "I've never worked deer leather, but I'd like to try." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her over the rim of his cup. "You take to new things easy." "I don't," she said. "I just stopped waiting to be good at something before I began." He nodded, considering that. "Tessa's taken to copying the way you slice apples. She told me." Temperance smiled faintly. "She said I do it like a Sunday lady." Nolan laughed once low. "She's not wrong." They ate at the table, the children chattering about the broken wheelbarrow and how Dinah had tried to nose open the shed door. Afterward, Nolan brought in a fresh log for the fire while Temperance tucked the children in, her voice a soft hum drifting through the doorway. When she returned, her shawl was wrapped close and her hair loose down her back. She moved slower, as if the house itself had settled around her. "You ever think about what you'd be doing now if you'd gone back to Missouri?" Nolan asked, not looking up from where he cleaned his rifle by the hearth. "I'd be living with my sister," Temperance said. "She's got 6 children and a kitchen the size of a cupboard. I'd be sleeping on a rug and sewing until my eyes gave out." He set the cloth aside. "You miss her?" "I do, but not enough to trade this." She paused. "I didn't know I could belong to something that wasn't built by blood." Nolan met her eyes then. "You do." The fire cracked. She drew closer, not touching, but near enough he could feel the warmth of her beside him. I don't know what comes next, she said, voice low. We keep on, he replied. That's all any of us ever do. She glanced down at his hands, scarred and steady. You think it's all right, what we're building here? I do. She let out a breath, then leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. Just let her rest there until the flames burned low and the wind outside turned sharp. Later in the dark, she slipped her hand into his beneath the quilt, their fingers fitting as if they'd been made for it. No words passed between them, but something settled that night, not finished, not perfect, but true. The first snow dusted the ridge by late November, light enough not to linger, but enough to send a hush through the land. The cattle stayed low, bunching near the creek bed where the wind couldn't reach. Nolan came in with his coat damp from fog and his gloves stiff from frost. Temperance was in the kitchen kneading bread with her sleeves rolled, the hearth behind her throwing a soft glow across the floor. She didn't look up at first, but Nolan paused in the doorway to watch her palms press and turn the dough with a rhythm that had grown sure. You been at it long? He asked, setting his gloves down near the stove. She wiped flour from her wrist with the back of her hand. Since before light. Tucker's been sneezing and I thought warm bread might help, he nodded, unbuckling his coat. I'll check the root cellar after I change. If the potatoes have started to sprout, we'll need to use them soon. She glanced at him, faint lines at the corners of her eyes from the heat. I was thinking of making a stew tonight, with salt pork and what's left of the turnips. You've got a good way of making things stretch, he said. Temperance set the dough to rise beneath a cloth, then looked at him fully. I learned how to make dough long before I thought I'd have to. He stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against the small of her back. You don't anymore. You've got a home now. Her eyes dropped to the floorboards, but when she lifted them again, something in her face had settled, less guarded, more certain. Later that afternoon, while Nolan mended a cracked yoke in the barn, Temperance brought him a cup of coffee with steam curling soft above it. She leaned against the stall rail while he worked, her voice quiet. I've been thinking of building a still room, she said. Just a small one, for salves, inks, maybe a few tinctures come spring. He looked up, wiping his hands on a cloth. You know how to make that sort of thing, my grandmother taught me. She kept a book, too. I brought it with me. It's in the trunk under the quilts. That why you saved all the rose hips, she nodded. And the mint. I dried both. I thought I might try a tonic for Tessa's cough. You build it, Nolan said. I'll give you the wood. She smiled, not wide but sure. You'll have to show me how to notch joints. I'll show you whatever you want. They stood like that a moment, the horses quiet behind them, breath fogging in the cold air. That night, as snow began to fall in earnest, they sat near the fire while the children slept. Nolan had brought in 2 of his mother's quilts from the chest ones he hadn't unfolded since the year she died. He laid one across Temperance's knees without a word. She ran her fingers over the stitching. Did she make this? When I was little. She embroidered the stars herself. Temperance traced one of the faded constellations. She was careful, she was, he said. You're the first person I've wanted to give it to. Temperance looked up at him, her eyes steady. I know we married fast, too fast for most folks. But I've come to care for this place, for this family. We're not most folks, he said. She set the quilt aside and rose from the chair, standing before him. Is it enough for you, what we have? It's more than I ever expected again, he said. And it's only grown stronger. He reached for her hand, warmed from the fire, and pulled her gently into his lap. Her body fit against his like it had always been meant to. She rested her head beneath his chin, and they sat like that while the fire burned low and the wind picked up outside. In the weeks that followed, the still room took shape off the kitchen wall, just wide enough for a shelf and a work table. Nolan built the frame, and Temperance filled it with jars and folded notes in her grandmother's hand. She taught Tessa the names of herbs, and Tucker learned to grind dried leaves with a pestle carved from mesquite. Nolan watched them through the window one morning while oiling his saddle. The children worked with quiet focus, and Temperance leaned over them, pointing out a pressed violet in the pages of her book. That night after supper, she brought Nolan a small tin of balm for his knuckles, which had cracked in the cold. "Smells like cedar," he said, rubbing it in. "Pine and beeswax," she replied. "I thought you might like it." He took her hand, still faintly stained from the pressed plants. "I like everything you've made here." The days slowed into winter. Snow fell heavier around Christmas, piling along the porch and blanketing the far field where the deer had passed weeks earlier. Nolan strung lanterns from the barn rafters, and Temperance stitched new mittens from an old flannel coat. They didn't talk about the past anymore, not because it was forgotten, but because it had finally gone quiet. One morning in February, Temperance stepped outside to find Nolan waiting by the gate, 2 horses saddled and ready. She wiped her hands on her apron. "What's this? Thought we'd ride to the ridge, just you and me." She glanced toward the house. "The children," Mrs. Ketter from down the road's already inside. "She owed me a favor." Temperance laughed softly, pulled off her apron, and climbed into the saddle with an ease she hadn't had the autumn before. They rode in silence, snow melting beneath the hooves, the sky clear and close. At the top of the ridge, Nolan dismounted first and helped her down. The valley below was wide and sunlit, the edges of the river just beginning to thaw. "This is where I used to come when I needed to think," he said. "Back before any of this began. It's beautiful," she said, brushing wind from her face. "I wanted to bring you here," he said, "because it's part of me, and you are too." She looked at him then fully, deeply, and took his hand in both of hers. "I love you, Nolan." He didn't hesitate. "I love you, Temperance." He kissed her there, under the wide blue sky, the wind lifting the hem of her coat, the land around them quiet and endless. They stood a long time, their breath mingling in the cold air, until the sun began to dip and the shadows stretched long behind them. They rode home together, their hands brushing between the reins. By spring, the stillroom shelves were full. Tessa learned to read the labels. Tucker followed Nolan into the barn with a hammer too big for his hand. The fields began to green and the land softened beneath the thaw. Temperance planted chamomile behind the house. Nolan built a swing for the children in the cottonwood, and every night when the lanterns were blown out and the house went still, they lay together beneath the stars embroidered into his mother's quilt, their hands entwined, their breathing even. It was not a grand love, not loud or wild, but it was whole, steady, earned, and it lasted.